Good? Okay. All right. I'll call tonight's Planning Commission meeting to order. And the first order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. All right. Next item is the adopt the agenda. Is there anything that we wanted to add? If not,
I'll make a motion to adopt the agenda.
Second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Then we come to swearing in new member, Commissioner Mike Melton.
All right,
And
we're gonna go up here, make this all official and. Alright. So yeah, stand right across from you there.
do you want, is she gonna take, are you gonna take pictures? Do you want to? Come
Yeah,
on up, come on up.
Oh, yeah, okay, and then raise your hand and repeat after me. I, Mike Milne,
I, Mike Milne,
do solemnly swear
solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution
that the Constitution
of the United States, the Constitution of the State of Minnesota, and will faithfully discharge the duties of the Planning Commission of the City of Maple Plains in the County of Pennington and State of Minnesota to the best of my judgment and ability. So help me God. All right. Thank
Well
you.
done.
All right. It's
All
official
right.
now, so.
Which means you get to vote. Okay. We have approval of the Planning Commission meeting minutes from January 3rd. And did anybody have anything that they wanted to add or clarify? Or I was good.
I'm good.
Mardell? Good. All right, then I'll entertain a motion to approve them.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from January 3rd.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. All right, now we have new business. Hold on 1 minute. It has to do with, there'll be a public hearing regarding bridge investments. The applicant and Mike Raring, owner for the property that around here is referred to as the schoolhouse property. And what we usually do is staff will give a little bit of information. I'll open the public hearing. People can add anything that they want to, answer questions as we go through. The hearing would be closed and the commissioners will have conversation or ask further questions of anybody. So we'll kind of go that way.
Okay. Thank you, Honorable Chair and Commissioners. This item coming before you is, as stated, a request by Bridge Investments for site plan review and conditional use permit for the renovation of the existing commercial building and the development of a new detached accessory building and associated site improvements for the property located at 5300 Highway 12, commonly referred to as the schoolhouse building. The property is located on the north side of Highway 12, directly across from Delano Avenue, which is on the south side of Highway 12. The property is located within the city's mixed-use Bud Avenue zoning district, and it's guided by the city's comprehensive plan as mixed use. It's approximately 1.4 acres in overall size. So the applicant approached the city about redeveloping this site after they acquired the property several months ago. And we had several discussions relating to what kind of uses were permitted within the mixed-use Bud Avenue zoning district, and then what ultimately could be done with this property. And with that, the applicant provided some initial concept sketches for the property, which included redevelopment of the existing building into multifamily residential, as well as the development of a detached accessory structure for a garage, and initially in some of our discussions also the potential of a detached storage structure. Through staff review process and just correspondence back and forth and talking about kind of the vision for this area, what the intent of the downtown design guidelines were, the mixed-use district and the Highway 12 corridor, the applicant provided us with the plan that we're reviewing tonight, which focuses primarily on the multifamily residential redevelopment of the existing building, and then the development of a detached accessory structure, which directly correlates with providing parking and storage for the multifamily building, and then no other ancillary storage building, which would have been associated potentially with a different business. So we got to this point through kind of an iterative process going back and forth with the applicant. In saying that, I just want to preface a little bit of the discussion relating to the site plan review with anytime we're dealing with existing building, we always try to balance what's there, what can be reused, how much and how feasible is it to make certain improvements that directly correlate with the requirements of the city's standards. And as you know, we have in the past worked on how those downtown design guidelines are applied to existing properties versus, say, a brand new property when we can just come in and simply say, you got to meet it. So we try to balance that, and you'll see that in some of the notes and comments I put in the report. Ultimately, for the city to consider the reuse of this property, multifamily residential is a permitted use in the mixed-use Bud Avenue district. So as it sits, the proposal to redevelop what was an office building, at one point a school, so a semi-public use, into a multifamily residential use does fit within the parameters of the city zoning code and how this property is guided without any other action by the city. We're not rezoning, we're not giving any kind of special use relating to the multifamily. What we do have the ability to review then as it relates to that is the site plan review, building architecture, landscaping, lighting, and all of the associated site improvements that go along with that. And then in the mixed-use district's case, somewhat unique, but accessory buildings or detached accessory buildings are a conditional use for all accessory buildings within mixed-use districts. So any of our 3 mixed-use sub-districts, conditional use is required for an accessory building. So that's the conditional use part of this, is whether or not the accessory building meets the criteria for granting the conditional use. Conditional use doesn't apply to the multifamily or the site plan component necessarily. So with that, the applicant is proposing to renovate the building into 17 total units, which would be comprised of several 4-bedroom units, 1 2-bedroom unit, and 1 3-bedroom unit. So a little bit different than I think what you would normally think about with a multifamily apartment building. The applicant has stated they believe there's a market for larger apartment units that would have more bedrooms than less. And if you look at the floor plans that they've provided, you can see that it's a pretty major renovation inside the building that they're proposing to be able to accommodate the proposed 17 units that they're proposing. So the building itself, from a renovation standpoint, would primarily be renovated on the interior, with minor modifications being made to the exterior. The applicant provided the city with a concept sketch of the exterior of the building, and you can see, compared to the existing building, it's really just some very minor aesthetic changes, really some paint that would be applied, and then some just general cleanup of the building. But the existing windows, the existing entrances, openings, roof lines, and everything else would remain the same as they are on the existing building as proposed. As it relates to the remaining renovation and the site plan that surrounds the building, the applicant is proposing a detached garage, which would be the detached accessory building. The detached garage would provide 5 individual garage stalls, which would be 1 per multifamily unit, which is required by ordinance. We require 1 indoor garage space per unit, as well as 1 additional exterior parking space. And then in this particular case, the applicant has 12 additional parking spots that are for larger vehicles. So the total is 17, which matches the number of units in the building. So the 5 kind of individual or smaller single-door units are here, and then the ability to accommodate 12 spaces within this larger building. It would have a taller garage height, as well as more space to accommodate what they believe is going to be demanded by the market for larger vehicles, just trucks, pickup trucks, Suburbans, things of that nature. And so with that, they have the 17 total garage spaces proposed in the detached accessory building. You can see the parking breakdown in the report. Total of 35 parking spaces are being provided, 18 surface parking space, one of those being accessible, and then 17 garage spaces. The city requires that there's 2 spaces per unit, and one of those spaces has to be an indoor space, for a total of 17 of the required spaces. So with that 35 total parking spaces, the applicant's right at the threshold for parking, and given the parking lot and how it lays out, it looks like it would be adequate to accommodate the proposed use for the multifamily building, the way that they have it laid out. We did work with the applicant on the orientation of the building behind the detached accessory building. We looked at where that would be located. There were several different options that were looked at, but ultimately we thought it was best located in the back of the building, not on the highway side of the building, but actually behind the building, so that for the most part, visibility from Highway 12 to the accessory building would be mostly screened by the existing building, or at least it would look and be subordinate behind the building, and show up, I think, to appear a little bit better. So the other aspects that we looked at as it related to the couple of structures that are on the property, the city does have architectural guidelines that pertain to first floor street level the primary facade, which would be the Highway 12 facade, as well as to the sides and rear. Because we're dealing with an existing building and they're not proposing to change any of the existing elevations of the building, we didn't go into great depth on that particular. One thing I will note, just in a very quick takeoff of the existing building, if you look at the openings as it relates to the door and then the glass of the building, the front facade might be the one that's almost not in compliance, whereas the sides exceed the required openings and fenestration, if you will, for that 15%. Because this building's brick, all the way around it, it would comply with the other material requirements of the city's existing architectural guidelines. So having 40% openings on the front, 25% wood brick stone, and then on the sides and rear, 15% openings, 50% wood brick stone. They exceed most everything. The 40% openings on the front would be the one where we'd be a little bit shy, but not overly, not that far. But so we'd look for feedback relating to that from the Planning Commission if there's any questions pertaining to the architectural guidelines. Then as it relates to those buildings, again, setbacks, front yard setbacks, there is a 50-foot required front yard setback from Highway 12. That's both for setback from the road as well as parking. One thing to note is that on the existing site plan, there is, or historically has been, parking in front of the building. They're proposing to eliminate that parking and just have parking along the side and in the rear, essentially, with the drive aisle. In doing that, they meet that 50-foot setback, which comes across right in this area. And so they would actually be bringing this building closer, or this site closer to compliance, by moving that back and then complying with the 50-foot Highway 12 setback. The side yard setback is 10 feet. The rear yard setback is 10 feet. And then the accessory structure side and rear yard setbacks are also 10 feet. So both the principal and accessory structures have the same setback in the mixed-use district. And so they're proposing to meet the 10-foot setback, the closest point being in this corner here, but they'd be right at that 10-foot setback for the accessory building. And then the principal structure meets all other applicable setbacks. So with that, they'd be able to meet those setbacks. Then we did a kind of a comprehensive or overall review of the site plan relating to things such as parking lot lighting, site layout and amenities, landscaping, stormwater, and then we just have a couple additional considerations. The applicant did provide the city with a general lighting plan, which shows the proposed location of the lights on the site, as well as potential, essentially what the photometric radius of the casting of those lights. We would ultimately require a full photometric plan that shows the foot candle levels across the entire site plan to ensure that we meet the foot candle requirements of the city's ordinance, which is that the light levels cannot exceed 1 foot candle at all property lines for adjoining property lines and right-of-way. So we would want to ensure that that's met by looking at the photometric plan. And so that's something that we would be asking the applicant to provide the city. Generally, the plan that is being provided with the proposed cutoff type fixture is compliant with the city's ordinance relating to that. They're proposing a simple shoebox type light fixture. And we would look at the cut sheet for that as well, but really it's going to come down to whether or not the photometrics can meet the requirements. But based on their this drawing here, it's assumed that it can meet those requirements. They show that radius of light cast for all of the lights proposed, as well as the building lights themselves on the proposed accessory building. You can see those as well noted on that light schedule. The site layout, a couple of points that we've gone back and forth. The applicant is essentially wanting to use the existing bituminous that's already on this site and cut out those portions of the existing bituminous that would not be used to create what is being proposed in the site plan layout. As you know and can be seen by the pictures, the majority of this site, not the entirety, but the majority of this site is currently covered in bituminous pavement, or at least in a what's kind of a bituminous pavement. So they want to come in and actually cut those portions out to create what's being proposed under the site plan. So it's kind of a reverse paving, if you will, of what somebody might normally do. But in any case, a couple of the points that we looked at, one, there's an existing access point into the site on the east side of the site as well as on the west side. The location of the west side access point is shared with the adjacent property owner. We've had discussions internally amongst staff about whether or not we should close that access point off on the west side of the site. But what was noted is that that would conflict potentially with the access coming into the west side, coming into the adjacent building to the west.
Mm-hmm.
And we wouldn't gain a closure on the Highway 12 frontage. And I think that would reduce our ability to maneuver vehicles throughout this site, especially potentially emergency vehicles.
Yeah.
It's kind of something that we've gone back and forth on. We've had a bunch of discussions on it, and I don't know that one way or the other works better than another. But I think in the existing configuration, or the existing and then what would be proposed, it leaves the most opportunities for if something were to happen, a tree falls over on one of the access points, we still have access into the residential site. You will note that there's not a huge grade variation from the highway, so getting access to the front of that building probably is fairly easy in either situation. But if you go out there right now and look at it without that second point access, if one of those access points got blocked for some reason, you would have a difficult time. So at certain times of the year, or at least this year, we have other obstacles to getting into the front. So we talked about that, but with that access, one of the things that you'll see in the fire department comments is the ability to completely circle a building. Mm-hmm. At one point, we had a concept that closed this off and turned this back into green space, which would, from from a impervious surface standpoint, be nice, but emergency vehicles want, or emergency services wants to be able to get around all sides of the building, and so we put that back in so that we could get access around the west side. And then you can see from the parking lot layout that they're proposing, they're actually pulling the parking area back off of the property line, creating a new green space along that eastern property line. So all of this would be newly created green space, which would be an advantage to that site in trying to return some of the overall area from currently being impervious back to a pervious surface. So we've worked with the applicant on the site layout. The applicant is proposing to have 25-foot drive aisles with 20-foot parking spaces, which do meet the criteria for the city. The applicant is also proposing another couple of truck parking spaces here that would actually be 15 feet wide by 20 feet. So they'd be a larger space for tenants of the building that would have larger vehicles. They exceed our threshold, so we don't really have, as long as they meet it, we're okay. So that's something that they could add on their own. The only other aspect relating to that parking lot that I want to touch on is we are concerned about the condition or the quality of the asphalt in that parking lot. It's something we noted in the report. It's something that we want to have our city engineer take a look at and ensure that it is capable of supporting the use that is being proposed. And I don't know that we have a certain specification relating to we do for new parking lots, but existing, but I think there's a reasonable standard of practice that can be applied, and we would be able to review this parking lot to ensure that it can accommodate what's being proposed. We have concerns that there are some areas of the parking lot that might not currently be bituminous anymore, or might not.
Well, even in front
Yeah.
of it. I mean, even years back,
Yeah.
so.
So that's something that we noted, and we have a condition in the staff report should the planning commission make a recommendation relating to that. And then trash enclosure or trash can, or how they're gonna accommodate trash is something that we still need to finalize. They do have the opportunity to accommodate trash inside the garage building. Or if not, we would wanna have a separate enclosure if it was gonna be a dumpster, or something that couldn't be taken inside. The trash facilities, whatever they are, whether they're cans or dumpster, have to be fully enclosed. That's something we can work out yet. There's not a location specified, and maybe it's something the applicant can comment on tonight. Landscaping, we have gone back and forth with the applicant a couple of times on the landscape plan. We still have some recommendations relating to the landscaping. There's a couple of things to consider on this site. There are some large existing trees that would be maintained on the site. There's actually several trees back on this corner. I did confirm with the applicant their intent to save those trees in the back part of the site. They are shown here on the site plan. They didn't translate over, I don't think, on the landscape plan side. But the applicant's intent is to preserve the existing trees on the western property line, as well as the two trees that are in front, and then the two trees that are in front of the building. So see if I can show you. You can see back here, there's a row of trees that would be the intent to preserve those. You can see the two trees, not this necessarily, that's outside of the, or that's on the front side, but you can see this tree on the corner of the building here, as well as a tree back on the corner of the building here that's on the other side of the drive aisle. Those would be preserved, as well as this tree in this location. And then there's one on the other side.
What about the two evergreens in front?
So these are the large deciduous. One of the evergreens fell, in the front.
It did?
Earlier. I think was it this, one of
I
those.
think that one.
One of those two
I
fell.
think it
This
was
one
the
fell?
No, I think it was one with the.
This
like-
one?
Yeah.
That one fell?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I don't know, this one is
I don't know the status of that
questionable
one.
condition, so that's something you guys could comment on. I don't know the answer to that, but I guess when we were looking at it from a staff level, the deciduous trees were more important, I think, to preserve those, and they're intending to preserve those. Yeah, this one's already
Mhm.
gone.
That one's
And
gone.
then if that one goes, I don't think it would be a huge loss in the overall scheme. So, the other couple of comments we talked about, they are proposing to create a new landscape island here, which is not there now. That would be cut out of the existing parking lot. They are proposing a kind of a medium-size Japanese tree lilac, which actually probably do okay in that parking lot environment. It is a deciduous tree, so they'd be adding that back in. And then they're proposing to plant this whole area here with a mixture of, again, the tree lilacs and dogwoods. My comment in the report is that this area here, if it's just kind of randomly planted, is going to have a hard time being maintained. I don't know, you'd have grass and maybe mulch and I don't know. So I would encourage them to relook at the landscaping along that eastern property line as well as right here in this area to try to organize that so it can accommodate snow removal, but also then have some kind of organized beds that can be maintained, and then grass areas that would be potentially maintainable on that side. And so that's a comment that I just made. And then as well as it'd be nice to have some year-round screening. That doesn't necessarily have to be evergreen, but just purposeful kind of year-round screening, whether it's ornamental grasses, mixture of grasses and maybe some evergreens, and something else that would kind of help block the cars. Again, really we're focusing in here because that's the most visible area that you're going to be able to see that has kind of high visibility. If you think about the curve on Highway 12 coming from the east around that corner, that's going to be the more visible part of the site. And so we just made a comment on that. I think that's something we can work with the applicant on getting revised. And then the other area is just maybe this area here, which we've shown in the pictures. That evergreen tree fell down last year. There is a planter that's out there right now. This planter, is that going to just be kept like that? And is there any other opportunity to provide, something in this area? And then lastly, and we've talked to the applicant about this, you can see on this plan as well as the aerial, there's kind of what I would just call a tired landscaping around the perimeter of the building. A lot of overgrown species that have just been there and kind of reached their maturity and their lifespan. And they did say they were going to work on a foundation planting that would be a refresh that would kind of go along with the updated paint and updated site plan. And so that's something that we want to work with the applicant to kind of finally realize on that. Outside of that, stormwater management, grading and drainage, we did make comments. You can see those comments were included in the packet from the city's engineer. They did note we'll have to have a review from the watershed district relating to that. There was one of the things that was noted related to just checking the existing sanitary sewer service as it relates to I&I to make sure that it is working properly and there are no issues relating to I&I on that. And then we talked about a little bit about the grading plan and whether or not there should be some sort of a best management practice implemented on the east side of the site where the water kind of all flows from the water flows generally in this direction here, going that way towards my dot, so it goes across the site. So whether or not in this corner of the site there ought to be some sort of a infiltration area, rain garden, bioswale. There's lots of different things that you could potentially do, but whether or not we should work on that. One of the things that this site is going to do, if it were to be approved as proposed, is we are reducing the impervious surface on this site, creating more pervious, which is a good thing. It will allow more infiltration potentially, or absorption at least, as the water runs from that southwest to northeast. So it is a benefit in that regard. But you can see the comments, and those would, any approval that the city would consider would be subject to those additional engineering comments. So with that, the redevelopment of this property from commercial office to multifamily residential is a permitted use. The city requires the accessory garage for multifamily buildings, but then makes it a conditional use. So it's kind of a, if we're going to approve one, you'd have to approve the other because you need the indoor garage spaces associated with it. And so they kind of go hand in hand. We did work with the applicant to try to work on the aesthetic of the garage, you'll note the building materials of that garage are kind of a face brick and hardy board siding. So those are materials that would be compliant generally with our architectural design standards, even though they're in the back of the site and we don't have a specific accessory building standard. But I do think it would at least complement.
Should match, yeah, complement the
Yeah,
building.
the building.
Yeah.
And I did note, and the architect has noted that it's gonna be really hard to get an exact brick match. But I think paint color on the hardy board as well as a brick that is in close resemblance is gonna be a nice kind of complement at least. And so with that, the applicants are here. I'd be happy to answer any questions relating to the proposed site plan, any of the comments that were made, or any of the items that I put in the staff report.
Thanks much. I'll open the public hearing at 6:33, 4, something like that. Do you have any comments that you want to make, or just answer questions that we might have, or anything you'd like to say? Yes, now is good.
Yeah, if you could come up to the mic
Yeah.
too, that'd be great.
Yeah, thanks.
And then just while he's coming up, I'm just gonna point out, officially the letter that I had, handed out to you from the neighboring property. They are, I'll just read it quick, from Claire Rude. As the closest neighbor to 5300 Highway 12, I strongly object to any change in the zoning of said property. This property is clearly zoned for commercial industrial use and not for residential use. Residential use of this property would clearly defeat the purpose of the zoning rules, which we will all abide by. Furthermore, in my opinion, this property is not suited for residential use, given the fact that it is located on a busy, noisy highway, and it is surrounded by a multitude of businesses and commercial enterprises. Since I will be unable to attend the March 7th hearing, I wish to acknowledge my vote via this letter, which I am absolutely against any residential use in this location now or in the future. And then just so that's his letter. And as we pointed out before, it's
Mixed,
permitted,
yeah.
mixed use, so. Wanted to just put that out there.
Good, thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Steve Urban from Out of Box Architecture, and I'm here in behalf of the applicant, and we'll go over some of the basic things. So I want to acknowledge the Honorable Michelle Bliss and the other commissioners. Isn't that a good way to get it started? First of all, I think you've seen a lot of these things and people coming up and telling you how great we are and what we've done. But I really want to share a story with you to start with. When Mark first showed me this building before he bought it, we were walking through it. And as we walked through this building, how many of you have been inside it? Yeah, right. And I says, this would really be a good place to live. And from that on, we looked at the possibility of taking this historic building and saying, we don't want to break it up into all kinds of rooms and so on, other than if you take a look at the plans, there are only 5 apartments in this whole building. 2 downstairs, 2 second stairs, and 1 upstairs. So it's we wanted to maintain the concept of the wood floors and give a really nice place for people to live. And Mark's experience in housing and so on, he knows that in an area like this, there are a lot of places you can't get 3-4 bedrooms. It's very difficult. And so that by doing this, we have taken a historic building and we're putting people back into it on a much different note than, say, if it was a real estate or something of that nature. So that's how it all began. And then we started working with Mark on this, and we had some really different concepts in the beginning. But as we went through with Mark, we recognized what the city's wants were. We recognized where you were going in your future. And so with Mark's help, we went through this, and this is the final plan that we came up with. The other thing I think I want to point out, and I think Mark mentioned this in the review, Well, you probably don't know this, so I'll tell you now. I grew up in Montana, and we have a lot of pickups out in Montana. And how many times do you go to somebody's place and you can't get around because there's pickups and you can't go through? So we addressed this because this is a western part of the metro area, and there's a lot of horses out in this area, a lot of people in that particular realm of things. So we wanted to make sure that what we did here would accommodate what people might do. And so we added 4 pickup parking spots, which are 15 feet wide, but they're 25 feet, 30 feet deep, so that when you drive through to the apartment building, you're not zigzagging around a bunch of back pickups and some little hookups for trailers and so on. So that was one thing we took a look at. The other thing, with the help of the planning, if you notice, could we go back to the original, the site plan? You'll notice that we eliminated that Mickey Mouse parking in the front, and that's exactly what we called it. And if you notice, from the right side, you can get to the front door almost at the same distance as if we had that parking in the front. So by taking that parking out, and it was as recommended by staff that we would like to add landscaping, we will do that we'll definitely do something in here to enhance that particular area. The other thing we ran into were the 2 accesses. And you don't run into this very often, but we did. So virtually, if you really look at it, all of our parking is on the east side. So I would say that 90% of the use will be on that access. The emergency use would be the other one. So we're not depending on the access on the left-hand side or the west side, southwest side, as we are on the east side. So we orientated all of the parking basically on the east side, so it'll be in and out on that particular side. You'll have to bear with my voice. It's when you get a cold once in a while, you know, those things happen. Then our garage and garages on the back, with our big garage, basically that's to accommodate the potential use of all the people, and as was said before, there are 17 bedrooms. Now, I'm not sure that a 3-year-old's going to be driving a truck, but a lot of times Dad has a truck, Mom has a car, and then they have another van between them. So we wanted to make sure that parking was very accessible on this particular piece of property. The only other thing, and we will take a look at that, is the lighting, and we'll add to that lighting, making sure that we meet the city's requirements. And with that, I think that Mark did such a great job going through this whole thing that I just as soon open it up for questions.
Okay, great, thank you.
Who wants to start? Stefan?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Lots of chicken scratch. It was an excellent report, Mark. Thank you. Very thorough. One thing, though, that I wasn't covered maybe that I'm not sure if it was resolved or not was the potential overlap of the neighboring property. Could you address that and what may have resolved or may have evolved from that?
Yeah, we don't have resolution on the overlap of the neighboring property. There's a strip in the back of this property on the north side that belongs to the north property or this property. I don't know if you guys ever had any more resolution on that from the survey that you want to talk about?
Well, the
Just gonna see if I can see.
because of the scenario, we haven't gone in depth in that because let's see, I don't have a little. Has anybody got a little
his little
pointer?
red light?
Yeah. It's right on the top button there.
One thing we looked at, because it was recommended, what happens if we close this? At one time, we closed this all off and made it green space. But then it was recommended by the fire department
Yeah.
not to. And so we would have to then take a look at the fire truck coming around, making sure we've got the turning radius, which I'm sure we do. So virtually, depending on what ends up happening, we can accommodate it all the way around, if you'll see. So that this became a real issue, not only with us, but with the neighbor. So we don't know for sure, and I think if we close it off, the neighbors, and we closed our part off, I think this neighbor is gonna have to get a different driveway. So we're trying to be useful on that scenario. So as far as we're concerned, we can get our emergency vehicle around this building, and if it is intent, the city closes it off, fine. If not, we want to be good neighbors.
So I do recall some conflict when we looked at
Yeah.
the CUP for
For
the
this
neighboring
building.
property there, and I keep trying to remember all the conflicts, but is the conflict, back then, was it more about the use of this site that was a conflict with the car sales, or the other way around?
Yeah, I
It
think,
was-
so
it
if
was
you
this
look at,
way.
yeah,
It was-
and I don't know, if I can zoom in, maybe I think the overlap is in this line here,
Is it
Yes.
that real thin
that
sliver
strip
there?
right there.
Yes.
And that was a conflict that was called out on the plan, and I don't,
But in terms of parking and use of that driveway space?
Yeah, and that was resolved by the
yeah,
auto place. And you don't use your southwest entrance, do you? You come in this way all the time, yeah. And, because they kind of closed off their southwest, kind of like they had originally thought there. But in doing all of it, as I'm remembering it, everything from, like plowing and where the trees were, et cetera, that was taken into consideration from a certain point, because I can even remember talking about where the trees or the brush started, kind of thing. And so it was, as far as I'm remembering, resolved.
it's a good question. We didn't resolve it anymore here, but really none of the proposed improvements had much impact on.
Does it need to be resolved from a legal standpoint, or just from?
I think it'd be good to just clarify if we can. I know in the survey it wasn't clarified. They just say that there is there's a error in the descriptions that shows an overlap between the two parcels.
So
I don't know
from a
what
legal
the-
standpoint, we don't need to iron this out and resolve the conflict from a surveying standpoint in order to
Yeah,
grant the CUP.
no, I don't think we do, because we're not we're not changing the building, we're not redoing the building and essentially,
even
or
the
the,
lot line.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know that legally we'd have any
Okay, all right, I just wanna ask-
reason.
That, this whole area is kind of
I-
awkward, right? It's not only that, but, half of a driveway. Looks like there's 2 half parking stalls there. See where it says 10 and 10? Are those 2 old parking stalls, or what's proposed there?
Yeah, nothing at this point is proposed, that's landscaping now. So you can see that area there, there'd be a new curb line. That would be proposed to go around that area, and if we
Okay.
go back to the aerial, there you can see it pretty well there.
Yeah.
But if we go to the overall, maybe that's not as clear.
Well, you can kind of see where,
Yeah,
yeah.
Okay.
this would go around, there isn't a parking spot there, there wasn't a parking spot drawn for the adjacent use, so,
Yeah, and these 2, it looks like 2 stalls are drawn in here, but that's not
that's correct,
That's-
there's no
that's
stalls that would be there.
misleading?
Yeah.
No,
I don't know what those 2 lines are, Steve, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Right here.
I'd have to ask the surveyor on that one.
Yeah, and there's utility and power, and I'm wondering if
Yeah,
it's
that-
somehow shown, I don't know what the 10 is though, but, there's a power pole here, and that
Well, and they've
power
got
line
some
goes
of the
overhead,
lines, yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Because even to,
If we still leave that, you can still have, something that kind of softens up in terms of landscaping, kind of softens. The whole
Yes.
lot looks like it's either dirt or crumbly stuff. And even if it was grass, people are going to be able to, in an emergency, go over the grass, whatever, kind of thing.
I'll look at that. I think if, we'll look at that before we go to, if it gets recommended by the planning commission, I'll look at that and see if there is any other legal implication for us and/or the property owner to clean that up.
Yeah, just,
Now-
Yeah.
Now's the time, you know,
Yeah.
kind of thing.
And Mark will have his attorney look at it, and we'll work this whole thing out. And I think, you know, that I can certainly say at this point, the intent here is to work with the neighbor, make sure we don't
good.
change his situation there at all, because we're not depending on it. And so whatever seems to work out for the city and for the neighbor, we're going to be able to work through that right away.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I agree with
Yes.
that. My inclination, though, is to sort of want to clean up this area.
Absolutely.
So my first reaction was do away with the driveway. We have, all the access is going to be off the east driveway. You've got you've got a fire lane all the way around the building that has easy access to the west or eastern driveway. So it's really not necessary at all. So my question would be, how beneficial is it to the neighbor? And is there anything else maybe we should be looking at doing that can maybe solve both? You know, whether it be even leave some existing pavement at the extreme corners so that they have good, you know, driveway leading into their property, even though they would sort of be encroaching on this property. But then remove the rest of the driveway further northeast,
Yeah.
but maintain the fire lane.
Yeah, you're saying if you just left that and kind of
Angle it like
angle
that.
like that, and then
remove-
take this
take that
out,
part
and
out,
then
but
this
still,
just would.
you know.
Yeah, I mean, that's what our conversation was internally, was whether that had a benefit to the city and/or to the adjacent property. And I guess we had a discussion. I don't know that we came to a conclusion. I think there's some discussion. If we can't close the access on Highway 12, which would be to me, the real benefiting part, does that access help or hurt this site? And I didn't think there was probably a criteria one way or the other, or I don't think it does one way or the other. So then I just thought, well, for emergency services, is it better to just have the secondary access point if we need it? And if you close it off, then it doesn't get plowed, it doesn't get maintained, and then does it, not provide you with that
Yeah,
possibility?
it depends on how the owner feels about
Yeah.
possible encroachment from, if there happens to be, a number of cars that all arrive at the auto dealer at the same time, then you need to maybe use that for parking space temporarily. I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, I think, as I mentioned earlier, that if you're familiar with the space itself, or the area itself, this needs to be maintained right in here. I mean, for him to get inside there, because here's the, oops,
Here, there's a,
yeah, that space in there, right here, needs to be got in. We can't really move it down. If we move it down, we take parking out of him. If we move it to the
I was
west.
proposing to reduce his drive lane into the property, just the area further to the northeast. That would be more of the, kind of where it says existing drive
yeah.
on the plan. So he
Yeah.
would still have full access, even though it encroaches on the corner of your property. But it would eliminate the drive lane from.
And I'm sure that can be worked out with the neighbor, because what we don't want to do is force something to happen over here for the neighbor. And that if we need to maintain it here and fill this in, so whatever sort of works out with the city, we'll work with that.
and
Thank you for the recommendation, because we'll take a good, serious look at that with staff and get that taken care of.
And look at the notes from when we had the last meeting, because that was resolved. Because part of the deal, so to speak, was that, that they weren't supposed to be encroaching on your property and vice versa.
Sure.
And there was an acknowledgement that, what's used, not used, that kind of thing. And because the
Right.
building had been vacant for so long, I think but all of that was resolved, so,
I'll look at that.
yeah, keeping in mind.
Oh, I have just a number of oddball questions and comments. Landscape-wise, I like the recommendations that planner had suggested. In the front of the property, do you have any plans for, between the fire lane and the highway, are there any plans for enhancing the landscaping there at all? And also,
As was
if you can
mentioned.
answer what might happen with the sign out there.
Yeah, as was mentioned before from Mark, they would like to see a little more extensive landscaping, and that, we assumed that was part of the area, so we will then fulfill that in there.
Okay. I wasn't sure if that was right in front of between the building and the fire lane, or between the fire lane and the highway.
Between the fire lane and the highway, definitely. We definitely want to do something in that area,
Okay.
because that does reflect on the city and everything as people drive by, so
Exactly, yeah,
we
and-
definitely want that
I'm
to look
glad
good.
You're considering the foundation landscaping as well, too. Between the building and the fire lane, what's the condition of the ground there?
Well, it's ground. There is a bunch of old kind of plants in there, and I think we did put a note on there. We're going to rip those plants out and then re-landscape that particular area. The other thing we have to be very careful is we're turning this into a place that is going to be an apartment, and so we don't want a lot of plants close to the windows.
Yeah, you need,
We need that away from the windows, so we're going to clean that up and then think of it more of a grass. But I think what might be quite nice is using some of the different grasses that we can get some height and so on in the grasses instead of just a plant. Because, hunting in the West, we could always hide down on the ducks as long as we had the right kind of blinds. And I just want to make sure we don't allow that to happen here. So the grass might be the way to go.
are you planning on any lawn in that area, or is it all?
Oh, yes, that's what I'm saying, but we may put patches of grass to,
Ornamental
to,
grasses?
to bring some height and
Sure.
some excitement to it.
When I looked at some of the street view images, it looked like it was a lot of rock, maybe rock mulch to that area
Yeah.
and so forth. So if that could be cleaned up and made into lawn, that would be great. Also in that area, you've got the accessible parking stall there, which is great, and then path leading in.
You caught that, didn't you?
Yeah, oh yeah, I always do,
Yeah, we got to have a path over to the handicap,
to the ramp.
to the ramp. Now, that only goes into one unit,
So
but I
how
still
much-
need a path
I
over
couldn't
to
tell
it.
from your floor plans, really where the where the doors were, and where the accessible entrance would be to the building.
Is that staying on the west side of the building?
Yes, it's on the
like it
west
is
side
now?
of the building.
Okay.
Okay, so you'll continue accessible path then from that stall all the way around the corner to the,
Yeah, and it's a real trick in there right now. And we thought we would see what, if this is going forward, then we're going to get serious on exactly how we get that in there. It's a really sort of a quagmire right now if you go up there, except for the ramp. And we seriously thought about taking the ramp out, but it just doesn't, no sense in it to it. Now we can offer a handicap accessible facility.
Is there space on the west side of the building for an accessible stall?
Well, it depends if you close the road or not. Yeah.
Okay. Just a thought.
But if we do close the road, we could stick an angled handicap there right off that. In other words, make it wider.
Yeah.
We need to
The
maintain the fire
chief-
lane
yeah,
for
fire
sure.
chief
but
Yeah.
I just thought
for that.
if that could be,
I think that could possibly be worked out together, yeah. Good call.
oh yeah, what are your plans for the sign?
Well, we haven't pushed the sign too hard because we're in discussion with that. And that's why we don't have a signage plan. Basically, we really don't need to advertise it like a commercial building. And if you drive, tomorrow when you're driving out on 12, I mean, remember, this building's at a corner and you're coming at an angle. You take a look at that 5300 that's up there right now. I mean, that's what you see. And we don't think we have to identify this building with big signage. So it will be something very small and simple, and probably we'll work it in with the landscaping in that area so that it's a nice piece of landscaping with a simple statement across, and that'll be the sign.
Or would a sign on the, above the front door?
Oh, yeah, we've got to do something there,
Maybe that's all you need.
yeah. But we're not looking for big signage at all.
And we have a sign ordinance. It's not a multi-unit building, so they can
Right.
come in under, as long as they comply with our sign,
Yeah.
under the sign permit, that would be reviewed
Yep.
independently,
Okay.
so.
I like the idea that you're proposing here with removing